hundreds of cancer patients in Northern Ireland can't get drugs that are free in England.
You know, it's cruel, it's inhuman, and it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong.
I would love to have the drug. I would love to have it for myself, for other people. But I have to accept that in my time I might not get it.
Tonight, we investigate why it's one rule here and another rule in England. "58-year-old Alistair Murphy from Newtownabbey is ill with cancer. For the last 6 years, he's been fighting to stay alive.
I was diagnosed in February 2008 with advanced metastatic prostate cancer. Prostate cancer which has escaped the prostate and gone into my bones. It's spread throughout my body, which means it's incurable and ultimately terminal.
Alistair had no real symptoms, so for him and his wife Laura, the diagnosis came as a shock.
It's just like a bombshell. Almost like an out-of-body experience. You hear it, but you don't believe it. The old things about denial and, you know, shock, fear, all those things are true. And my wife was on the floor, you know, and I was just shell-shocked. Literally, it just, I mean, I think I turned around to the urologist and said, well, how long? Prognosis was around about 2 years, maybe 3 tops.
6 years later, a succession of different life-extending drugs has delayed the growth of the cancer. In January last year, 72-year-old Vera Saunderson from Carrickfergus was diagnosed with liver cancer, which spread to her bowel. She was successfully treated for this, but the cancer returned.
About March this year, I developed a pain in my back, and it got worse and worse. It was a very severe pain, and they discovered there was a tumour in the third lumbar in my spine, but also there was one inner near the lung.
When your oncologist phoned you, what did he say about the prognosis?
It's incurable. They told me they're very straight with me. They told me I have incurable cancer. They didn't say anything about life expectancy, and I didn't ask. I don't particularly want to know that. And I'm very pragmatic, and I sort of accepted it, just accepted it. I think I had guessed that it wasn't good news.
There have been huge strides in cancer research and care over the last 2 decades. Treatment has become very specific to an individual's particular condition. Even with terminal cancer, people are living longer by finding drugs that delay the growth of tumours. Since Alistair was first diagnosed, several new drugs have been developed, which have helped him live a lot longer than expected.
Whilst you're surviving with this drug, the research scientists are developing new drugs, so that new stepping stone could be appearing very soon, and that has been the case for me and others in a similar position.
Today, Alistair is on his way to the cancer centre in Belfast.
Tell me about the treatment you've been getting, where you've got to with your treatment.
Well, currently on my second batch of chemotherapy, which in itself is quite unusual. Very few people actually get the second batch.
So how is the chemo actually helping you, Alistair?
Well, the chemo's not a cure. What it's doing is it's buying me some extra time for these other drugs which are in development. The longer the chemo works, the more time there is for these other drugs to come to market.
But there's absolutely no doubt that my luck's running out.
There is now another new drug that could give him a chance to keep extending his life, but it's not available here right now.
Hello, Joe.
Alistair, good to see you.
Good to see you.
This way.
So Joe, you see when I get to the end of this current 10 sessions of chemo,
Yeah.
I mean, obviously I need a break.
Yes.
But what I really want is access to this new drug, enzalutamide.
Yes.
I'm hearing great things about it,
Yes.
but I'm concerned about its availability.
I'm hoping that by the time you finish your chemotherapy, we'll have access to it.
So it's going to be down to funding, basically.
Yes, I think we're definitely lagging behind in the time frame to get this drug. There's no doubt about that. And thankfully, at the moment, your chemotherapy is going well. You're responding to it. But if it wasn't and you needed something right now, yeah, we couldn't give you that drug. It is frustrating for me as an oncologist that if you did need it, I couldn't give it to you right now. Unless if I was working somewhere in England, no problem.
All drugs in the UK are approved for use by NICE, the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence. It makes difficult judgments as to whether or not the NHS can afford certain new and expensive drugs from the pharmaceutical companies. The companies are charging tens of thousands of pounds for some cancer drugs. That's just for one person's treatment. They want to claw back the cost of developing the drug and make a profit.
NICE was developed by the last Labour administration in 1999, and it was brought in to get rid of a problem that existed with so-called postcode prescribing across the UK. And what NICE allowed was a system whereby everyone had equal access to the same treatment across the UK.
But that equal access all changed in 2011. The Westminster government set up a £200 million cancer drugs fund in England. This was after a public outcry that NICE was not approving some newer drugs that could extend patients' lives and reduce suffering because they cost too much. But our devolved administration at Stormont did not set up a fund for Northern Ireland, so at present around 40 different drug treatments are not available here.
We've got back to the situation roughly we were in before 1999, where there are some patients within the UK who have access to cancer drugs that other parts of the UK are unable to access. And whilst personally I believe that the NICE process was fallible and at times the decisions were not correct, it provided an equal access to drugs for all patients in the UK that the Cancer Drugs Fund in England has undermined.
In England, anyone who wants to try one of the new drugs can apply through their GP to the Cancer Drugs Fund and is likely to get the treatment. Whereas here, your chance of getting a drug that has not been approved by NICE is very small. Patients have to prove they would respond exceptionally well to treatment. While this is under review, the result is that currently only 5% get the new drugs here. Every year this leaves hundreds of cancer sufferers here in Northern Ireland unable to get the drugs which just might extend their lives. It's estimated it would cost between £5 and £7 million to create a cancer drugs fund. The financial pressure on cancer services is something Alistair now knows all about. The drug he wants has now been approved by NICE and could be available here in 6 months' time. But it is costly, £25,000 for a course of tablets, and it is up to individual health trusts to judge if they can afford this. In England, if they won't pay, patients can still get this drug through the Cancer Drugs Fund.
The existence of these new drugs is like a man crawling through the desert, dying of thirst, and somebody hands him a glass of water, and then all of a sudden says, "Oops, sorry, I didn't realise you're not English," and takes it away. You know, it's cruel. It is so cruel to see men and women in Northern Ireland dying unnecessarily, or at least not having the opportunity to have their lives extended. It's inhuman and it's wrong. It's fundamentally wrong.
When Vera, along with her daughter Lynn, went to see her oncologist, he also informed them that a drug existed in England that may extend her life at a price. The drug is called sorafenib. NICE says it doesn't provide enough benefit to patients to justify its high cost. But again, it is available in England through the Cancer Drugs Fund. It could potentially stop the growth of Vera's cancer and alleviate her pain. But she herself would have to pay £3,000 a month. That's £36,000 a year.
When you own your own house, you have equity, you have a wee bit of savings. You go through all that. I've done all that. I've done the sums. I have savings, and yes, I could use them. I know my savings won't last forever. I'm not prepared to sell the roof over my head to fund a drug which may or may not work. Look, you see that yacht?
Okay.
I'm not sure what would happen if you could afford to buy the drug for a certain period of time and then you had to stop. I'm not sure what would happen then. Would it be withdrawn from you? What would happen? I just don't know at that stage what would happen.
In fact, once Vera couldn't afford to pay for the drug, the treatment would stop. Because Lynn lives in England, she and her mum have discussed Vera moving there to get the drug on the NHS.
I'd like to have done anything to prolong her life, but I also have to consider what her needs are. And this is her home here, and she doesn't want to leave her home. It makes me very upset that she can't have something that a friend's mum could have in England. That makes me very upset.
But it's clear that Vera doesn't want to move to England.
I don't particularly want to do that. I don't want to particularly stay away from home for months at a time. So I suppose I want the best of both worlds, but I'm not pushing for this drug simply because I think at my age and my time of life there are probably people on the list who need it more than me.
The charity Cancer Focus NI is running a campaign for equal access to the newer life-extending cancer drugs for people in Northern Ireland. Chief Executive Roisin Foster says that since June, more than 20,000 people have signed a petition.
I think we need to keep the focus on the cancer patients in this discussion. They are the people who at the moment are suffering because they cannot get access to drugs that other patients can in other parts of the UK.
Cancer Focus says people desperate to stay alive are taking drastic action. Despite being very ill, some are actually moving to England to access drugs.
We have met with people who are self-funding, who are working their way through their private pension plan money, who are going to leave loved ones with no money, their wives, their children, but they feel they have no option. They're paying £2,000, £3,000 a week, and yet if they didn't live in Belfast and lived in Bradford, it would be available to them. They've paid the same taxes, the same national insurance.
Cancer Focus is due to take its campaign for equal access to the drugs to Stormont next week. Since the Cancer Drugs Fund was set up in England, MLAs have on a number of occasions debated if we should have a similar arrangement here. In 2011, there was an agreement between the parties that a fund should be created. But 3 years later, they have still not found the money to deliver on that pledge. So why doesn't Stormont create a Cancer Drugs Fund?
Essentially to date, it's put other priorities first. There is, for instance, an option to raise the money required for a Cancer Drugs Fund by reintroducing a prescription charge. But the Stormont executive has failed to agree this. Some pharmaceutical companies are also offering financial assistance for the next 5 years to help purchase the newer medicines. But the Department of Health has rejected this deal too, because it says it wouldn't cover the cost of a drugs fund now or in the future.
A cancer drug has been
One of those who in the past called for equal access is Jim Wells.
If I'm a cancer sufferer in Ballymena, why should I be treated less favourably than I live in Basingstoke? Surely we're all part of the United Kingdom, we're all paying the same drug taxes and therefore entitled to the same drug treatment.
Jim Wells is the new Health Minister. But now, in his first interview since taking up the post, he seems to have changed his tune.
If I provide funding, say, for £30,000 for a drug that will give someone an extra 3 months of life, that's the equivalent of 2 heart bypasses, which could give somebody an extra 25 years of life. And that's the terribly difficult wisdom of Solomon decisions that I have to make.
Jim Wells's predecessor, Edwin Poots, has on a number of occasions suggested introducing prescription charges in order to pay for a drugs fund to treat cancer and other illnesses. We can reveal that in recent weeks he was preparing a proposal to charge £3 per prescription. But it's an idea that divides the two main parties.
I think there's fundamentally a good idea in having a look at this. But the reality is that the executive, certain members of the executive said they're not going to have it. But at the moment, that proposal, which would bring a lot of money into the system, really is getting nowhere. But I still think it was iniquitous that somebody like myself gets free prescriptions. I think that's wrong. And I think we have to keep looking at this, but we have to get executive support.
The prescription charge is not going to be the solution to simply tax the sick. And I've made Sinn Féin's position very clear. We are opposed to prescription charges, and you know, that is loud and clear.
In Northern Ireland, we have a high dependency on the health service. We have more people on sickness benefits than anywhere else in the UK. Also, significantly, we have the fastest growing elderly population, and they use the health service most. This puts a financial strain on all services across health and social care, not least cancer services. The rate of people getting cancer is growing fast because people are living longer. It is estimated 1 in 3 of us will get the disease. And in Northern Ireland by 2030, cancer rates are expected to have risen by more than 100% since the start of the century. While Martin Eatock wants patients here to have access to the cancer drugs that are available in England, he also says the harsh reality is that other areas of cancer care need money too.
I think it's important to stress that these are not life-saving drugs. They are life-extending drugs, and often